Welcome to this session, which is entitled Scaling TV, but it's scaling in much more than the way you'll think about it. We're not just going to concentrate on the technical scaling of television over the internet and over IP and looking at the technology aspects of that. We're going to be taking a much broader view, looking around at societal impact, at regulation a little bit, and I see also on the impacts onto content delivery and business models to an extent. It's not just about scaling on the network. It's not just about scaling on streaming, on edge CDN, on multicast capabilities or any technology aspect. It is actually also about how do we set the scale or the right sizing of the relationship with the consumer, the relationship with society, have the right tools to provide a fully safe environment to effectively translate that sort of relationship that we have between broadcasters and consumers today into that internet age. And also, we've also seen in the last few years, impact to the relationships between businesses as well. Content businesses, content owners, operators, the shift to direct to consumer. How is that going to scale properly in the future? And of course, the real key point for this point, because in all the trials and tribulations of many of those new entrants and those direct to consumer services, and that is the scaling of the right revenue levels, which is going to be critical to the development of the industry going forward. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our first speaker, Thierry Fautier, and I'll leave him to tell you all about what he is and who he is and what he's doing. And there you go, Thierry.
Thank you, Ian. So happy to meet all of you. You probably met me before in my previous incarnation at Harmonic, but now it's a new word, and I decided to call my company Your Media Transformation. So what I'm going to present today to you is something I wrote in 2021 for NAB, and at that time I was inspired by the transition of UK, not yet official, to all IP. And of course, this was also motivated by the Paris Olympics that will be on broadcast, but why not on IP? A lot of motivation. So here you'll see the quick agenda. I will run very fast because I want to give a seat. So I'm on a panel on all British, so I've been a special invitee to this panel. So scope, Ofcom report, delivery architecture, test cases for UHD in France 2024, some cost comparison, and also some options, how to scale the network, and conclusion. Basically, the scope is investigate a full UHD OTT solution. I took the France test case because this is going to happen next year, and focus mostly on the delivery technology. And this is based on real data. And if you want to access, so it was NAB 2020, and if you want to access, it's available on the NAB website. So the Ofcom report is the French regulator is investigating a full UHD OTT scenario geared towards, Ofcom is the, we try to investigate a full OTT scenario. There is also some transition plan in the UK with BBC transition into IP in 2030. The different technology considers are traditional CDN. This is what people do today. Deep scaling inside the ISP network, and also multicast ABR, which is one of the technology, and I know some other people seems with different ideas, more multicast based. And this is really focusing on the traditional broadcast, so the new consumption like fast and ad business impact are not considered here. And of course, this is a new topic to what was done in 2020. So if you look at the traditional network, you have an origin server who is going to publish to a CDN, and this CDN is going to talk potentially to a private CDN, and then going to an ISP and going to the user. So in blue, you will see the internet traffic and for the video, and the black is the other internet traffic. So that's the way people are doing delivery today of broadcast content over IP. So now, if I look at the private centralized CDN architecture, you put your caches very high in the network, and then you are going to go through an IXP, who is going to go to an ISP, and you see you are bypassing the traditional CDN. Then this is what some broadcaster, especially one in France, is doing today for their VOD and live traffic. So that's one way to scale your internet delivery to internet network. The second one is to push the caches much deeper in the network. So you put basically your private CDN either inside or outside the ISP network, but this is what Netflix is doing, and this is what Amazon Prime is doing in the US, or this is what DAZN is doing in Italy. And with this architecture, you can see, because you are getting closer to the end user, you have a much better performance. But of course, you need to deploy more caches. It's always a trade-off between where you put the caches and what is the performance of the system you deploy. So what I've done here, I've taken the crazy assumption of 15 million subscribers, peak concurrency 5.7 million, using one single format CMAP for both HLS and DASH, 2160 HEVC, 8.5 megabits per second, aggregated ABR bitrate of 25 megabits with 30 channel and 30 POPs. Okay. Out of this, you have a simulation of the public CDN cost, the private centralized CDN, and you see very, very, very small, the private decentralized CDN. And you see there's a huge gap between the two, meaning that the traditional CDN approach, which is the reference private centralized CDN, you start to scale down in price. And very interesting, I put in blue the national DTT carriage costs, which is for a broadcaster what is going to look at as a reference point. And no-brainer that the private decentralized solution is today, from a financial and technical point of view, the way to go. Now, people say, yeah, but wait. This is all unicast. Let me show you my multicast solution. So in that case, what you do, you have an origin server talking to a carousel server who is going to create a multicast carousel who is going to deliver multicast content over a multicast network. So it only works on the multicast network. And then at home, you have a gateway who is going to be the proxy to move multicast to unicast. And the reason this has not been adopted at scale is because this is complex. You need to control the gateway or the client. And of course, you don't have fast, you don't have targeted advertisement, because this is very broadcast-centric. Don't forget, multicast is the broadcast implementation of an IP network. So if I conclude, full UHD OTT delivery is possible using the right technology. CDN is more expensive than DTT, not a surprise. Private centralized CDN is lower marginal cost. Private decentralized CDN is lower cost and attractive also from a cost perspective. And multicast ABR is feasible, is complex, and is not matching the unicast shift. Never forget, fast is very hot and is going to create a lot of traffic. You can debate if broadcasters want to go that way, but this is something that is required for unicast. And of course, all the advertisement is going to be also very important when you go IP. So UHD OTT is feasible and economical by 2024 with the right architecture. And if you want more information, if you want to reach, you can reach me on LinkedIn and also via email. Thank you very much.
Hi, and good to meet you all. I'm Richard Lindsay-Davies. I'm the chief exec of an organisation in the UK called the Digital TV Group. We're a research and technology organisation created originally by the industry, so the industry could write the technical standard for the launch of the first terrestrial TV platform in the world, and we've done lots of other things since then. And we still do that, but much of what we're focused on at the moment, and we've been looking at for, I guess, around 10 years now, is the migration to IP. And at our heart has always been that we believe that television is for all. Universality is very, very important in the UK, possibly less so in some other markets, but in the UK it's very, very important. And I'm a firm believer that actually the only way that we will ensure that we sustain television for all is by all of you and all of the sector working together to make sure that we take the best of what we've got, keep the market open, and make sure that everyone's got a role in getting to the future. So I'm going to talk briefly to you about some of the other dimensions of any kind of transition. In many ways, the kind of non-technical dimensions, and the complexity of getting there, but very much with my eye on the fact that TV is for all, and whatever we do, if we really are going to make a brave decision to quite gently transition the whole of our market in the UK, but it applies to other markets equally, then we're going to have to do it in a way that leaves no one behind. And that's where it becomes a big challenge, actually. And in fact, that last 5, 10%, 3%, it could be 0.1%, those last ones to migrate are the ones that are going to be the challenge. And they're not going to be commercially attractive, probably, to the commercial operators to address. Why do we think we kind of got some creds in this area? Well, we worked very heavily on digital switchover, and we've worked on many transitions since then. But before I talk about that, I just want to kind of remind us of the kind of the meta environment that we're working in. And we really are in a state of kind of permanent crisis. We call it perma-crisis. You know, we had the pandemic, and we kind of got through that, and then the illegal war from Russia into the Ukraine, and then the energy crisis and the economic crisis that's kind of produced, and some other things, and then we're having natural disasters caused by climate and other things. So it kind of feels that the context of which we're trying to ask an entire market to migrate its television services that seem to be more critical than ever to keep the market safe, secure, and inclusive. The context in which we're doing that in is a very, very complex environment, and that's not going away anytime soon, I don't think. And I find it remarkable that we kind of think that we came out the side of COVID and suddenly we're off killing each other with an illegal war, and then something else happens and there's a natural disaster. So we've got to do this within that context too, and I think we should always sit back and think about that. So how do we ensure that we sustain television for all as we move to IP? How do we scale up? And when I talk about scale up, actually, and in fact Ian and I were talking about this in the prep session, how do we scale up, but also make sure we've got the right dimensions of our television proposition so that we don't leave anyone else behind? We've built networks out for peak, which actually probably isn't, again, commercially attractive for the operators to do so. But also we make sure that we produce a television service that is similar to the television services that we have today, from level of resilience, ease of use, simplicity, not having to sign on 8 times every time you want to go into a new TV or a device, and you don't have the cybersecurity and safety risks that we're not used to with television. So how do we do that? And we did a piece of research in 2022, and I think probably some of you in this room we spoke to. We spoke to around, I think we spoke to 60 companies, but often the companies fielded 3 teams of 3 to talk to us. So it was a very complex piece of research. And what I realized, in fact, I was writing an article recently, and I asked ChatGPT to write an article for me with some parameters on the future of television and the future of media distribution. And it was dreadful. because it's you guys, it's the experts, and I say guys actually, I think you are all guys. Not a lot of diversity in the room. Oh, there's one. Hi. But genuinely, that's going to come from us. It's not going to come from stuff we know already. So, a few areas. One is, and you can go down the full kind of pestle analysis of this very, very simply. Politically, the only way that there's going to be a political appetite to move to all IP is if we do it by leaving no one behind, and we do it in a safe, resilient way that's going to make sure that we keep television working as it should. Economically, there are some really serious considerations. I mean, much of, I was at the Devoncroft thing and Josh was talking, and you know, we all talk about cloud, we're all talking about super excited about, you know, the new things we can do, AI. We've got a conference coming up soon and we've got someone talking about quantum. How it's going to break TV or make it better, I'm not quite sure which. But we all get excited about the new technologies, but actually many within our sector are actually, it's all about sweating their current assets and making sure that they sustain their current business so they've got a vehicle to fund where we're going next. So economically, it's complex. Social. If you look at the social impact of television, we do quite a lot of work research. We do quite a lot of research on the consumer front. And it has to be easy to use. It has to probably look a bit like a logical channel number to many people out there. Not that we don't want lots of much more exciting and bells and whistles and much more new business models and new functionality and virtual and everything, but actually fundamentally television needs to be as simple as it is today. And if we can't make digital television as simple as channel up and channel down or pressing 101 or whatever it might be, then we failed as a sector. And so how do we get to that level of simplicity? And in the UK at the moment, I guess we're a reasonably sophisticated market, but the level of fragmentation, the number of times you have to sign in, the trying to navigate content, etc. We all know this is quite complicated. Technology, the T. I'm a firm believer that most successful innovations are built on reasonably well-proven technology. We are probably not going to be going through this decade of transition using quantum computing to get everyone to the future of television. We're going to be using the tried and tested, well-standardized, well-tested, demonstrated, piloted, and trialed technologies that many of us have across today. Environmental. The complexity over the environmental issues and the kind of the wider impact of that, of a transition from broadcast to IP, is really multi-dimensional. And the fact that there are multiple CDNs running hardware across POPs across the network and switches they're just left on idling a lot of the time, and they're built for peak. There are very interesting things that we need to deal with there, right the way through down to the final device. So the environmental issues are really, really important and fundamental to any policy making that's going to get us to TV. And then finally, the kind of legal and regulatory environment. And we've got a piece of legislation that hopefully will come in front of our Parliament soon in the UK. It's in draft form called the Media Bill, which I guess will become the Media Act or something. And it's a really complex of amendment-based legislation. It's not a good read, to be frank, and it's a very complex piece of legislation. And they're trying to draft that legislation to account for the future of television, make sure that public service broadcasters get prominence and consumers are protected and the market's kept open and nobody gets to dominate the market or cream off 30% of our broadcasters' ad revenues, which is something that one of the companies has announced in Australia they want to do. So it's a very complex piece of legislation which has been well put together by a great team, only published a couple of months ago in draft format. Doesn't even mention fast TV, doesn't mention fast at all. And I'm mindful that the last time we had a significant piece of legislation called the Communications Act in 2003, which essentially created our converged regulator, Ofcom, which has been a good thing, I think, for us in the UK. if you search the Communications Act of 2003, it doesn't really mention the internet. You know, it's very, very hard to legislate and regulate for technology. So this is a very, very complex, multi-dimensional, multi-causal, multi-solution challenge that we're addressing. You're the experts and everyone out there on how we're going to get there. ChatGPT is not going to be good at finding the solutions for us, my guess is. I actually had to sit down and write my own article, which was a little bit challenging. But seriously, you're the experts when we are working together to find these solutions to make sure that we can scale up TV in many, many ways, not just capacity-wise. You're the ones that are going to come up with the answers, and then we'll synthesize those and present them and come up with some solutions as a sector. And that's the fundamental message I want to get across. This is very complex. The answers are going to come from us, and we need to make sure that we're positioning them and shaping them right so that they're accepted by the market and our policymakers. Thank you.
So my name's Colin Dixon. I'm founder and chief analyst at nScreenMedia. This is, by the way, a free resource to you. So there's new opinions, data, podcasts available pretty much every working day. So you might want to check it out. So I've been covering the OTT market since 2005, quite a long time. And I want to pull us back. And I want to talk about scaling from the perspective, particularly of the content providers, and how things have changed pretty radically over the last 10, 15 years for them. And by the way, I'm resident in the US, and I think the US is a little bit ahead of Europe in this transition. So I'm hopeful that there'll be some lessons for us to learn here to avoid very much riffing off what Richard has just talked about. So if we look at how things used to be, this is how things were before the internet. The gatekeepers in our industry were very clear. We all know who they were. It was either governments who were licensing bandwidth. So if you're a content provider, you had to be very big, very wealthy to be able to get access to that bandwidth to deliver your content. Then along came the traditional pay TV operators, cable, satellite, and telco. And they were bringing this content, which people who either couldn't reach because they were out of broadcast range, or what they really did was they began to broaden the amount of content that you and I could receive. So they were the gatekeepers. It was tough for content providers to get into this business. It was a money business to get into content distribution. And the truth is, though, once you got in, scaling was well known and well defined. Luckily, we had broadcast standards, and that constrained what the traditional pay TV operators could do, right? They had to be able to bring you the broadcasts, so they adopted a lot of the standards for traditional video delivery, etc. So everything was known, and we could pretty much scale. If you were a content provider, once you got over that getting into the business bit, scaling was pretty easy. You broadcast, and you worked with pay TV operators for the distribution of your content. As time went on, it became pretty difficult for content providers to, for us, the user, to find you. This is actually the Starsight guide from, I think, 1993 or something. This guide worked really well when there was about 5 or 6 channels. We're still using this, of course, and now we have in guides, in some of the fast guides, hundreds of channels to navigate using this guide. So it was difficult for your content to be found by consumers, but at least you had scale, at least you could reach people, right? Well, along came the internet. And for content providers and users, this had fantastic promise, right? Suddenly, there was a fabric which meant that I could deliver my content, in theory, to everybody on the planet who was connected. In theory. And as a consumer, if I was connected into this thing called the internet, in theory, I could get any content, anytime, from any provider, no matter the size of that provider. So fast forward to today, and things notionally are looking pretty good. In the UK, penetration of smart TVs now is at 75%. It's slightly higher in the US, a little bit lower in some other European markets, but it's well above 50% in the majority of them. So that means for a content provider, notionally, this is fantastic, right? Homes passed. I can reach as many homes passed. Actually, the good news here is, in the UK at least, I can reach more homes through connected TV than I can through pay TV, because pay TV is a little bit less than 50%. And definitely more homes than free to air. And I don't have to pay this huge tax to get in free to air, to do it. Actually, and I was thinking about things just the other day, about in particular this, and there's a company called Roku who's actually very dominant in the US as a TV OS. When Roku first launched its box, anyone could be on that box. Anyone. So you could be providing woodworking channels of you making stuff, and you could reach the world through a Roku. So rainbows and unicorns indeed. But unfortunately, things have changed. Things have gotten a lot more complicated. The number of gatekeepers in our business to reach a television has multiplied. Suddenly, every television manufacturer has decided that you have to have an agreement with them to reach the audience of the people that have purchased their TV to watch television. But it's not just them. There are TV OSs that are delivered on are used on multiple TVs. It is the fast platforms. There, you also now have to negotiate with the fast platforms to get on that television. So far from being simpler, it has gotten more complex to get carriage. Not only that, the internet has not been constrained by broadcast to slow the growth in the multiplication of technical solutions. Now we have multiple video formats. We can't agree on video IDs. We can't agree how to build an app platform. Every single platform is different. Metadata, oh goodness me, what a mess metadata is. Just providing information about what your content is a total mess. And reporting all this is also a total mess. Everything is a different format. So this has become really difficult for content providers. It has become an expensive business again, because every one of those gatekeepers want to be paid. They want part of your revenue as a content provider to bring you to, quote, their customers, the people that bought their TV to watch content. And being found is as big a challenge as ever, maybe bigger, because there are lots of private interests now. So, from a content provider's perspective, scaling their business is harder than ever. So, hopefully we'll get into some of these issues on the panel. Thank you.
So, I always like to tell a little story about the, forgive my voice, I need to get a little bit of water. The IET have run what they call the John Logie Baird lectures now for over 23 years, could be even 25 now. History is not what it is on the internet anymore. But the John Logie Baird of course, is famous in the UK as nominally the inventor of television, which is quite funny, because actually really, for the rest of the world, is famous for the person who invented television that we don't actually watch, because none of that technology he actually integrated was actually ever used. We went much more with the US generated solutions.
Philo Farnsworth.
Yes, Philo Farnsworth. And let's say thank you for that, because if you ever knew anything about the way that he did the television back then, when they launched the first services from right at the back end of where the IET currently has its headquarters, the way you actually produce a live service is you filmed it and rapid processed the film with huge amounts of chemicals to actually get it into a picture form, and then actually transmitted that out to all the viewers. And it was an environmental nightmare. So thankfully we didn't have that. But I always like to say that, because it explains why it's called John Logie Baird. And I think what we're going to talk about today is I'm hoping that the early days of moving to IP-based delivery is not the John Logie Baird era of television. Because we're in a level of change now, which I think we've forgotten how much change is happening every day. And we're discovering new things, new problems, new challenges. So that was just my little introduction there. So we've heard some very interesting stories today. I particularly like Thierry's little message, because it sends a message. The scaling of television on the internet, it's not really a technical issue. You can do it. It's a financial issue. And that's where we're raising the interesting point now, because the scaling of the content has suddenly become a finance issue, because content costs money to make. Someone sold a story of cheap content, and now they're having to get out of that, because we've got to actually make it work for the future. And of course, regulatory and societal impact is a huge challenge as well in that. So going now to the financial question. Thierry, do you want to add anything about the financial aspect on the technical streaming? Because it may explain many of the behaviors we see today.
Well, there's a financial, there is operational, and I'm very happy to see in this industry the ISP, who used to be passive until now, decide to take the horn by the bull and to build their own CDN, which is the first step. They recognize that they cannot let the traffic go and go to the European Commission, ask for a check. Those times, I think, will not happen. I think it's a collaboration between the content providers. Some of them decide to build their own CDN. I was asking EBU, what's the percentage of content provider broadcasters who are building their CDN? 40%. Is it reliable? Does it do live? Can it do the final of the Euro between UK and Italy? I don't think so. But BBC iPlayer for me is the huge technology step with, I think you guys have probably more than 50% of broadcast eyeballs are watching on IP. You go in US, if you have 5%, that's probably a big number. So, and in France you have IPTV set-top box, so you don't need to have all those things because it's multicast. So I think the technology is there, the mindset is shifting, and of course the regulators will have to put some rules and say, you have to deliver IP. If you can't deliver IP, you have to pay a fine.
That's
per subs per month.
Yeah.
You'll see people are going to move faster. Because either you invest in your network or you pay the fine. Why do you think France has such a high penetration rate of broadband on fiber? It's because the regulator has said if you don't deliver, you pay a fine. So either you invest in the network or you pay the fine. I like this stick and carrot approach.
Colin, one of the biggest discussions this year has been out about people like Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, and their challenges about making money. Their financial considerations, how are they going to get themselves out of their hole?
Yeah, it's a pretty difficult situation that they've got themselves into. They've forgotten that one of the most important facts about being successful in connected television, if you want to go after the broad market, which of course they do, that is, it requires great content, it requires patience as audiences transition from traditional media to streamed media. It requires patience for them to find you there. And unfortunately for Disney, it looks like they've run out of patience because they're doing exactly the reverse of what you should do, which is raising prices for their product and reducing the amount of content in their product. So this to me, the commitment to be profitable in D2C is purely a quarter-by-quarter financial issue for Disney. It is not a long-term view. And this is very disappointing because they really should be focused on the long term. I'm quite concerned that this plays into the hands of people like Netflix and YouTube, right? Because they are already there. Everybody's already using them, and they're already profitable. So, yeah. Broadcasters have to be prepared to lose money, I think, in streaming for longer than they would like. But if they want to be successful, that's what they have to do.
Thierry.
I would like to make a technology comment. If you look at Netflix and YouTube, surprise, surprise, they are controlling entirely their tech stack. Mm-hmm. Therefore, for them, scalability, no problem. Mm-hmm. I can add servers, I can add capacity. The others, they pay until they can't pay. So I think large-scale operator, BBC, have developed iPlayer such a success because it was done in a professional way. Maybe they don't have all the bricks, but at least it was done in a well-organized, well-structured compression. I'm very happy to see BBC still presenting papers on compression. If you don't compress well, you pay more. What do you prefer?
Mm-hmm. So, going to Richard, one of the things we haven't talked about or touched on is the consumer's role in this. Because this move to IP, in many respects, is consumer driven because they're voted with their feet.
It is, and I think it's, I guess in many ways it's like digital switchover, where the proposition of multi-channel, great experience, great content, often driven by sports rights or movie rights, etc., push the market. Also digital switchover aligned with the introduction of flat panel TVs. So people were actually going out and buying in the UK. It got to the point where our annual TV sales in the UK were around 12 million TVs a year in a market of 26 million TV households. I mean, that's a lot of TVs going into the market. It kind of makes no sense whatsoever. But it was driven by low-cost flat panel TVs, and then they happened to be digital. But we did have to do a lot of work, and there was money allocated to a help scheme that got people over the line on the final switch. But actually, digital television really looked like analog television. In fact, we made it look like analog television, and we put multiplexes on frequencies. There were more channels, but actually, it was a reasonably understandable thing to navigate. IP is entirely different, and we, as I said, we did this piece of research on the future path of TV last year, and we're working on it now. But things like single sign-on or simple sign-on or easy sign-on is really, really important, but really difficult to achieve because each broadcaster wants their own environment. They want their own one-to-one relationships with their audience. They want the audience data. They want the telemetry on the performance, etc., and they want to keep you in the ecosystem. So actually, they want you to sign in. And one of the elephants in the room with the move from, if we look at transmission, terrestrial TV transmission, moving to IP, there is absolutely no appetite in the UK for the broadcasters to, if you like, transmit across the internet openly and just let everyone pick it up. Back to your point, there are lots of gatekeepers in the way, but one of the biggest ones is they want their own environment, they want the data, and then they've got to get through the gatekeeper of the TV provider or the application, or you know, there was a move in Australia this week by Amazon to take 30% of the revenues on Amazon Fire products of the broadcasters. So that there's a very complex situation.
Yeah, but you actually said something interesting there. The move from analog to digital was the same thing, just technically different.
Didn't feel like it at the time, by the way. It seemed super.
Yeah.
I launched the first free-to-air products into the UK, and it was all super hard, and we lost money on the first ones we sold for a long time.
But today it's different. It's a different beast. We've got integration of on-demand, fast services from all over the world, etc. Advertising, you know, addressable advertising, which actually goes to a comment from you, Colin, in your presentation. Finding content, finding something to watch. Yeah. Because I'd contradict. You said a few hundred. I've seen a figure that says if you've got an Android TV in the US today, 1,400 channels are available to you in many markets.
Yeah, and in fact, Google TV is saying 800 in the US and probably very similar here. And of course, they've integrated the over-the-air channels in there as well. So there's
add a few fast apps.
This I am actually quite hopeful about. I have been pretty specific in my criticisms of the TV OS providers and of the fast providers in how bad their interface is and how difficult it is to discover. I'm very hopeful. I've seen lots of tools on the show floor at IBC using AI. Some of them call it generative AI, although I'm not quite sure where they're generating anything, but anyway. They do seem to be doing some marvelous things that are enhancing the metadata, making voice search work much better. We do still have some issues, some business issues that are pulling against consumers. That is when, for example, a channel was launched in the US on fasts called the Elvis Presley channel. It supposedly could reach 100 million endpoints and devices. I couldn't find it on 3 of the top 4 fast channels where it was supposed to be available. And what's more, Elvis Presley fans, who the platforms knew they were Elvis Presley fans because they watched that content, they weren't told it was there. And the reason they weren't told was because the platforms wanted Cineverse, who launched that channel, to pay them to tell. So, you know, there are some constraints, but I'm quite hopeful that we will fix those issues going forward.
Are we all hopeful?
Well, one of the things that frightens me, the stats on piracy on IP, whether I think that some of the biggest piracy happens on side-loaded on Amazon Fire Sticks, etc. But also you can go into an app store and download lots of IP streaming apps. I think there were around 500 in there. And the figures in the UK is way over 20% of males between the age of 16 to 35 pirate content. And those that pirate content are around 22% of their viewing is the pirated content. And then when you look at it, look into it in more detail, clearly there's the naughty ones that the kind of, you know they're breaking the law. There are a lot of them that think, well, because it's an app I've downloaded from a legitimate app store and I've subscribed to the pirate content website, I'm kind of paying for it anyway, aren't I? But the other reason why some of these people are using these pirate apps is because they actually provide consolidated search and access to all the content.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Every barrier we put between the viewer and the content, every time we make it challenging and difficult for the viewer to get to the content, aside from the economic side, which clearly is I'm sure it plays a very significant role in this too. But if we make it harder to get content legitimately, aside from the financial side, than it is to pirate it, then they're going to go through the pirated route. And so we genuinely have to try to, we have to try to use everything we know as experts to remove those barriers and make the path to legitimate content access as easy as possible, as well as everything else we're doing.
Okay. Well, this subject is a huge subject in itself. I'm sure all of you will welcome people to contact you after this particular presentation on LinkedIn or whatever, and to ask any questions that you may actually have. But I'd like, because in the time for us to come to the end, my voice is dying, but we're keeping going. But yes, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much. Everyone give a round of applause. Thank you.